So are you all ready for the magic of Christmas? For the fantasy of Christmas? And I use the word fantasy and magic because pretty much our society, our culture, has built up so many fantastic stories and images of Christmas. They've become part of the way that we celebrate this religious holy day. For instance, how many children have been involved in countless productions of the Nutcracker Ballet? It's incredible. When I was in Fresno some years ago, 3 different families invited me to go see it because their kids were there. 3 days and 3 nights in a row. I was praying to God that they didn't notice that I was there like the second and third night. But imagine, I mean, it took me days to get rid of those nightmares of mice turning into warriors and nutcrackers talking and sugar plum fairies chasing me. So a lot of therapy to get through that. How many productions have there been of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol? I can think of at least 5 versions, 6 versions that are on TV. Or how many of us have repeatedly watched George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart, being shown by his guardian angel the life that would have played out had he taken his own life, what the world would be like without him. It's a wonderful life. And how many of us teach our children and grandchildren, and I'm not going to do a spoiler, don't worry, to look for Santa Claus and flying reindeer and elves who prepare gifts in the factory at the North Pole and snowmen who talk, etc., etc. So Christmas is filled with fantasies that we have created. And while there's nothing wrong with a little fantasy, I think we have to be careful not to treat Mary and Joseph and the angel Gabriel as creatures of fantasy. Sometimes our society depicts these characters as nothing more than part of a children's story. Gabriel with his glistening halo around his head, his flowing robes, these huge wings coming out of his shoulders. Mary, how is she often portrayed? As a beautiful and dainty and pale woman who always had a smile on her face. Her eyes were always glancing up to heaven. She never got her hands dirty or her feet dirty. Her hair always in place. We sometimes portray her as anything but a real person. Instead, we make her part of this fantasy, a myth so many people believe. They become characters, Mary and Joseph. They become characters in a good story that has nothing to do with us. But the fact is, if we strip away all those embellishments that have become part of a Christmas story, we would find that Mary and Joseph were pretty much like all of us here. We would find Mary to resemble a young Jewish woman living at home with her parents, cleaning house, preparing meals, dressed in common clothes, with some kind of sandals on her dusty and calloused feet. Her hair would be dark and curly. She would have an olive complexion and probably a prominent nose. She would also be indistinguishable from other women her age in Nazareth. Joseph might be slightly older. Mary had been promised to him in marriage. His hands would be calloused from his work in the carpenter's shop, his face lined with age, his face covered with stubble, black and gray. He too would have looked like any other man his age in Nazareth. And what about that angel Gabriel? Well, since we've probably never seen an angel, we can't be sure how he appeared to Mary and how he appeared to Joseph in his dream. Gabriel was a warrior messenger, archangel of God. But did he appear as the angel we all envision, with flowing robes, long hair, golden hair, big wings? Did he crash through the window and scare everybody? Or perhaps he appeared as a bright light shining into the window where Mary was sitting. Maybe he appeared as a stranger at the door, having this conversation with her. We certainly can't know what that scene looked like. But I bet if we had been there, we probably would not have seen or heard anything. But Mary and Joseph did experience something. They heard something in their hearts. And it was convincing to them that this was not just another dream, not just a fantasy occurring. So I mention all of this not to deflate your sense of what the Annunciation might have looked like, but to remind us that these were people like us in so many ways. And if they were like us, then we will find them to be models for us of faithfulness and obedience and humility. And we would admire them not from a distance, but close up. If we can understand Mary and Joseph to be real people like us, then we might better understand how they reacted to the predicament they found themselves in. Surprise, fear, doubt, confusion. How many of us have heard some news at one point or other in life that left us speechless or fearful or doubtful? And if we understand that God often speaks to us without sending an angel to us, then we might better understand how Mary and Joseph came to believe that God was speaking to them. And if we embrace this story as a human story graced by God, then we can better believe that God does speak to us where we are. And that, like Joseph and Mary, we can say yes to this God's plan that we discern in some way for ourselves. I can't tell you how many times I have spoken with men and women, and sometimes very young people, who feel that God is calling them to do something in their life. Maybe it's a woman who feels called to the convent, or a gentleman who feels called to the priesthood or the ministry. It might be a person who feels called to marriage and believes that he or she has found their partner finally. It could be a person who feels strongly that they need to get involved in a ministry of some sort in the parish, that will give them some purpose in life. And it's not up to me to say, well, are you thinking clearly about this? Or how do you know that? And I'm not going to say, well, can you prove it that God is calling you to that? No. It's my job, rather, to support that calling that the person has come to figure out through their human intellect and through their reasoning and even through their emotions and their religious passions. You know, Mary and Joseph had to go through that process before they came to this yes, even though they didn't know how it was going to play out for them. It's not our job to cast doubt on people's dreams, to cast doubt on their calling and how they perceive God to be moving them in some direction. And remember, Mary and Joseph did not understand everything that God was saying to them. Mary asked questions of the angel. How can this be? Joseph already decided what he was going to do with Mary until he found out what the angel had in mind. But in spite of their questioning and their doubts and their uncertainty, somehow they found it within themselves to say yes. And again, haven't we done the same thing in life? Haven't there been moments when we were presented with some kind of plan, some option, some course of action, and after thinking about it, maybe praying about it and talking about it, you say, okay, even if you don't know how it's going to play out? Isn't that the human way of doing things? Sometimes we just say okay to decisions and proposals that people are offering us. We may not know everything. We may not have all the information we need. We may still have doubts, but we still say yes to whatever it is that is being asked of us. I know I've shared this with you before, but when I decided to pursue the seminary, I was finishing up my undergraduate work at Fresno State. I was 23 years old. And I started thinking at that point, what am I going to do with my life? I was at a crossroads. I had several options that I could see playing out. But what did I do? I talked to my closest friends. I prayed. I gathered information. And most of my friends said, follow your heart. And I did. An angel didn't appear to me, telling me this is what God's planning for you. I simply grew into the idea that this was a healthy option for me. And at some point I said, okay, let's do it. As human beings, I think the same thing probably happened to Mary and Joseph. Even though the story makes it sound like it happened in one afternoon, it probably took some time for them to process, to come to the point of trusting what they thought their hearts were telling them. They had to ponder, they had to pray, they had to talk to each other about how they felt God was speaking to them. And in the end, they said, okay, let's move forward. That's why they are models of faith and obedience. They embraced the reality in which they lived. And they said yes to everything that they felt God was calling them to. In a few days, we will be celebrating Christmas. You know, we have to be honest. For a lot of people, there's not going to be much magic or imagination this year as a result of the circumstances under which we are living. Many people will have to celebrate Christmas with a good dose of reality, with challenges and heartaches that have come this year. Many people will feel the burden that they are carrying this year. But in spite of that reality, we will still have the opportunity to say with Mary and Joseph once again, okay, God, we're with you all the way. And by saying yes to the reality in which we find ourselves in this Christmas, we could still know the wonder and the miracle that God has in store for us.